Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the bunker, or perhaps I should correct myself. This is not the bunker. This is Ray's office. It's been a beautiful day in Dartmouth. It snowed heavily last night. There's more snow coming tonight, but it's pretty pleasant nevertheless. Anyway, about 10 years ago, I made a model of HMS Dido. Dido is one of these vessels. This particular one is HMS Dido. It's a Dido class cruiser, World War II vintage. And we'll say something about the model, but maybe first of all we should say something about cruisers. Cruisers were vessels designed to sail great distances over long periods of time. In essence, they patrolled the trade routes of the empire in the 19th century. And initially they looked like this, with wooden hulls and primitive steam engines. But as the century progressed, they had iron hulls, as you see here. They still retained their sails, but eventually moved on to steel hulls, and finally steel hulls with armor plating. But as I said, the sails were kept because it was just not economic to travel those vast distances with coal alone. So here's HMS Calypso under sail. Nevertheless, towards the end of the 19th century, they lost all those sails, began to look like this, quite modern looking really. And with the turn of the century, we ended up with vessels such as this, HMS Defense, made of steel, no sails in evidence. And finally, by the 1930s, a cruiser could be quite large, 8,000 tons in the case of HMS Kent, shown here. It would have be driven by oil and have steam turbines. The Dido class was a group of 16 small cruisers built just as the Second World War was impending. They were small vessels, just under 6,000 tons, with crews of about 500. They were fast, well armed with guns and torpedoes, but they carried no aircraft. The Didos were built in two slightly different groups. Almost all the first group had names from classical antiquity. Vessels such as the Argonaut, the Charybdis, Cleopatra, Dido, Euryalus, etc. The second group had slightly different names: Bellona, Black Prince, Diadem, Royalist, and Spartan. These ships were built at various yards, but the Black Prince is of some interest to me, I guess, because it was constructed by Harland and Wolff in Belfast. Incidentally, if you're wondering about all those classical names, you must remember that we're dealing with a period in which there were a lot of well-educated people around, and they were familiar with the classical world, unlike today, I guess. These ships were worked very hard during the war. One was badly damaged and 4 were sunk. When HMS Charybdis was torpedoed and sunk in 1943, over 460 men died and only 107 survived. One of the first steps in model building, of course, is to get the plans. These are my plans for Dido, pretty battered up and with my colors added. And as you see, they're very, very simple, and the trick with these is to try and interpret them and cut all the pieces of plastic so that they fit together and make the model. One of the aids to being able to understand the plans is, of course, getting access to photographs taken from one of the ships. This is Bellona, HMS Bellona. One of the interesting areas I find in these models is in the bows, where you have all this equipment that's necessary for anchoring a ship And here, if you study these documents, you learn of all these very strange pieces of apparatus: the blake slip, the screw slip, the cable holder, the fair leads, the chafing plate. This drawing was put together by a fellow called Norman O, who is long dead now, but produced a beautiful series of illustrations useful to ship modelers. These larger warships carried a number of small boats, one being the captain's gig. The captain's gig is just a small boat reserved for the use, guess who? The captain, of course. This is captain's gig, drawn by Norman O. It's a small wooden vessel, and as you see, well into the 30s, these small vessels were equipped with sails. And as I mentioned, there would be more than one type of boat on a cruiser. Might have 4 or 5, such as you see here. These are the sailing launch and the motor pinnace. Final thing that I should mention is, of course, that ships during wartime were camouflaged, and this little book was the source of my information on how to paint up my model. And for example, it contains a nice photograph, a very big image, I guess, of the Black Prince, which was one of the second batch, distinguished, by the way, because their funnels are vertical. And then it's got some very nice drawings. There's Naiad, Euryalus, and Phoebe in actually quite outrageous color schemes, all greens and browns and so on. But to choose a color scheme, I looked at this series of drawings. This, from the top down, is Sirius, Scylla, Argonaut, and Charybdis. And I didn't have precise information on Dido, so I used the scheme from Scylla. Scylla, of course, was a slightly different vessel. If you look at the guns, they're quite different. So this is the finished model. I got it down from the attic where it had been for 10 years, so it was covered with dust, and lots of parts are damaged. Bits have fallen off. That's the way it goes. So as you see, I've finished it in those camouflage colors that I got from the book. And that was done using an airbrush. You can't really do that sort of fine work with a paintbrush. This area is the forecastle, the front end of the ship, if you wish. And you notice that the deck is steel, because this is the area in which we have all the anchoring equipment. They're the 5.25-inch guns. And if we look at it a little bit more detail, to the right is the steel deck, to the left is the wooden deck, and in between is the breakwater, which acts as a breakwater, I guess. The bridge area, the bridge is open, and at the back of the bridge you can see the equipment used to direct the guns. This is the central part of the ship, showing all those small boats that I mentioned. And at the extreme left you can see the set of torpedo tubes, 3 on either side. Again, this is the view towards the stern with the torpedo tubes at the extreme right. There's the stern with the rudder and the propellers badly damaged, unfortunately. The stern, by the way, is called a cruiser stern. And if we look at it from the other side, we can get a better view of the 2 of the propeller shafts and the rudder. And lastly, underneath is the bilge keel, which is used to stop the ship from rolling too badly in rough weather. While making this video, I suddenly remembered why I started building models in the first place, and the reason was I was always interested in marine painting and thought rather than using photographs, it would be nice to build a model ship and illuminate it with a bright light and get a good feel for the shape of the thing. Anyway, as it turned out, I got quite interested in the model building and didn't really indulge in the painting very much. This painting was done before I started building models.